Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to the webinar. We have a really terrific program today with some of my favorite advisors on our Barker-Gilmore team and great guests with Courtney here today. I'm just going to talk through a few minutes here because people are just signing on. So we're just finishing lunch and jumping on. We have another great crowd. This is our third webinar geared toward AI, and I think it's completely appropriate because it is the talk of everyone out there about AI. I'll actually share a couple stories. I had two situations just this morning. One that GC that implemented the AI tools for contracts and said it's been life-changing experience. So that's pretty amazing. Then I had a major corporation general counsel who went on to say implementing AI is critically important, not to reduce headcount, but to get the lawyers out of the weeds and more focused on strategic initiatives. And I thought that was terrific because what a great selling point for everyone on the team. So I don't want to steal Marianne or Audrey or Courtney's thunder, so I'm not going to talk through it anymore. But welcome to our webinar focused on AI. So Barker Gilmore, you know that we put these programs on monthly. It all is geared toward the development of the in-house lawyers out there. We want everyone to be performing at their very best. So please keep a lookout for our webinars. We have, if you go to our website, you'll see previous recordings. Of course, this one's going to be recorded, and in the next couple of weeks, we'll be distributing the recorded message as well as a white paper to really describe, what we learned today. Throughout the program, feel free, just scroll down, raise your hand, and ask a question. We're going to try to answer some of the questions throughout, and if you think we run out of time, we do try to answer some of these questions in some of the papers that follow. So be on the lookout for that. But feel free to ask questions. We'll try to get to them as we go through the program. So with all that, I am going to pass it off to Marianne to let her introduce everyone. And Marianne is one of our newer advisors, and we couldn't be more fortunate to have her on our team. How lucky are we to have Marianne raise her hand and join Barker Gilmore? So thank you all for being here, and welcome to our great speakers today.
Thank you very much, John. We're so pleased to be with you. And my colleagues on this webinar are Audrey Rubin. She's an experienced general counsel of Orbit and Grant Thornton. She's a guru on Rubin solutions and all things that are tech. And I know you've read about her in many of the articles that have quoted her about how to run an efficient law department. We're also joined with Courtney Welton, and Courtney is a fabulous lawyer. She's a general counsel. She was at Allstate. She has her business as well. And trust me, she has been in the fields of AI and is so knowledgeable. I know you're going to be very impressed. And I'm pleased to join you. I've been a general counsel with 5 global companies, and I'm so honored to be with Barker Gilmore. So please, we're ready for your questions at the end. If we can't get them today, we will get to them down the line. And I'm going to kick it over to our moderator, Audrey Rubin.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, John. And of course, thank you everybody who has signed in. We can move ahead to the next slide, which will simply give you a very high-level taste of what we're going to be discussing today. We don't need to talk about the fact that AI is here. We will talk a little bit about how AI's role is evolving so rapidly and affecting law departments and companies. But what we're really going to try to do is give some practical tips and stories about ways to use tools and systems that you might already have and improve them with AI. As John mentioned, I've done it with routing contracts to the right people to save time. I've done it with, not really templating, but giving AI the tools to do some review of contracts. People use it for everything, as you will hear from Marianne and Courtney, large firms, large departments, small departments, international, public, private. It pretty much doesn't matter. hopefully you will learn something on today's webinar as we go through this. And again, we're gonna discuss not only that it's here, but how you in the law department can orchestrate the best change for your businesses. And with that, let's start. We can go to the next slide. We wanted to ask, who in your company has accountability today for AI governance? Really quick poll. So please answer the questions here. Who has accountability for AI governance? While people are answering the question, Courtney, I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions here. You've led through a number of waves of technology changes. Do you think AI is different fundamentally from other changes, such as, what we had to go through with GDPR and now the technology for abstracting depositions and so forth? Is it pretty different, or is it relatively the same so that we can fall back on what we might have done before?
You know what I would tell you is I could argue it both ways, but because I'm a good lawyer. But I really think, Audrey, that it really is just a spectrum. When we think about emerging tech and the disruption it causes, it's a spectrum. And I do think we can depend on the ways we reacted to all those other disruptions, and particularly when emerging technology was going to be used differently. So I would say it's more towards being similar to what we had before. And that's what we really wanted to share today, is to show that, GCs are not alone. You have a lot of different frameworks to be able to leverage, and different thought processes and things that you tackled before that you can bring forward. So the way I see it is there are some very different components. So the scope is much bigger. The acceleration, how fast it's moving, kind of in 2-week increments, the technology itself is definitely different. But how we think about it as lawyers, we're ready and equipped to do that. And so we shouldn't be scared of it. We should be ready to really lean into it and use our analytical skills and our frameworks to help our companies get the best out of it.
Thank you. Let's see the poll. Shared ownership. Yeah. Yeah, this makes some sense based on what we thought. Technology has the next biggest chunk, with legal controlling it in some ways. That's interesting. Mary Ann, what are your observations on who owns it, shared ownership, and how AI impacts the legal department and communications with the board?
Well, I know that shared ownership is the way to go, and it's the way to go, and it gives you sound governance. And we've used it many times, right? We use it with ERM, we use it with all sorts of just governance itself and compliance. And we need to fold in AI management. The shared responsibilities is the way to go. You cascade the risks and opportunities, the risk owners, the business process and reviews, and the policies and procedures. You take ownership at the top, and then you cascade responsibilities throughout the organizations, as I said, as you do so many times. All hands on deck. And yes, AI can be helpful with cybersecurity, fraud detection, prevention, and can help with real-time data-driven insights. So yes, it's a blessing, and we have to plan for it. I've done that in the 70s and 80s when I represented a big publisher and software company, and you have to go where no one else goes. You have to be bold, you have to be creative, and you have to be persistent. It pays off.
Thank you. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Audrey, can I jump in just with one
Sure
caution?
can.
Okay, because that was a lot of shared accountability when we looked at those percentages. We didn't exactly know where that would go. And what I'd say is part of why we wanted to have this today was really to be pragmatic for all of you, because sometimes this can feel overwhelming. And what I would say out of the gate looking at that is that you really have to put in a RASCI model. So that's RASCI, SCI, and that means you need to figure out who's responsible, who's accountable, who's supporting, who's consulting, and who's informing. And I have used that model as a lawyer for a very, very long time. You hear it in consultant speak, you hear it from business people. But if you're going to have shared responsibility for something this fast moving, where things are pivoting every moment and this much risk and opportunity, you do have to figure out who is doing what, because otherwise it starts to feel like people are pointing fingers at each other when something doesn't get done or when the result isn't right. So I would definitely say part of what we're talking about today is how to divide up all those different work streams, but realize that you have to be very specific, because it is different who might be responsible versus who might need to know about something, or it might be different who needs to support than who needs to lead. And you really have to use, I find that framework to be extremely helpful. My team knows that I've always pushed for that in any kind of complicated scenario. You need to actually physically write those out and agree on as a team on how you're thinking about that. So just wanted to say that out of the gate, seeing how many of you are saying you're in shared responsibility frameworks.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In my experience, shared is great, but somebody actually has to be, at the end of the day, the buck stops here. And one of the things that we're finding, and maybe even sort of recommending here today, is that legal's role continue to expand in terms of the ultimate manager of AI. We're not going to design the tech, we're not going to implement the tech ourselves, but there is so much risk and reward with AI. And again, the board is probably going to look to the lawyers when they have questions or they want something implemented. And we do have to be careful as to who is doing what. Can you talk a little bit about how we avoid being the legal department of no? That's still a perception on the part of a lot of business people. And if we're so involved in AI and we want to put some guardrails out, but we also want to enable it. Mary Ann, how do you think the law department can kind of sort of take ownership of this while working with other departments and teams and not be the department of no?
Well, the general counsel is the enabler. Anytime that there's a wild west out of there, anytime where there's no direction, that's where then they look to the general counsel. And, I was always doing that throughout my career. But today, the directors are expecting that. They're demanding that. They want you to step into the unknown. They want you to step into the breach. You step up and you put the governance functions out there so that people can see how the cascades down the responsibilities and roles, and there's accountability there. We've been through this many times, including the backup certificates for the securities laws. When people have to sign on the dotted line that they have given you all the information and it is correct, you'd be surprised how much cooperation you get. It's really an enabling thing. And, we can look to industries where there are more carrots than sticks in artificial intelligence. And they could be industries where there's potential to produce large gains in the near and long-term future, particularly where there's big data, repetitive process, or complex predictions, insurance, healthcare, finance and banking, energy, manufacturing, telecom, and transportation. They tend to be heavily regulated and accustomed to rigorous policies and procedures. So when we step into the breach, we are stepping forward as leaders within the corporation. And then we share the responsibilities, because many times in the new world and the pioneering that goes on, you have to be the one who brings the order, and the order is governance.
Well, you can see on this slide that we have developed, we do talk about things like turning AI governance into scalable operating models. Courtney, can you embellish on that? That's under the fourth section here, operational and execution excellence. How do we lawyers turn AI governance into a scalable operating model?
Well, I think first I want to hit home what you just said, which is you have to be careful though, because as you scale something and you use the word governance, what business people hear is gates and stopping and no. And so you were really, I think, spot on to ask us about that. And Marianne, your explanation was really good. So I think the question is, we know that AI is dispersed. We know there's opportunity for it in every part of almost every business out there right now, which is what makes it a little different. And it's moving fast. So the question is, how do you govern that without saying no across the board? And there's a couple ways to think about it. And the first is, I would say, is you really dig in and you say, what is the most high risk and most high opportunity area that your business is looking at? Because the truth is, you may not be able to get to everything. That's just a fact. So you've got to figure out your specific business model, what your company really wants to do with it and why. And you need to embed yourself enough to understand that. And that's really, to me, the starting point of thinking about a scalable model, because it will become overwhelming to you depending on the size of your company or how widespread the opportunities are with AI. It could even be in a small company, but lots of opportunity if you try to boil the ocean. So you've got to figure out what really matters. And then I would say, second, you need to get use guidelines and training out there quickly. It will not be perfect. It will not be perfect. And you've got to get comfortable as a lawyer with that imperfection because of how fast things are moving, both the business side, the technology side, and frankly, regulation has not caught up. So what you put out there as user guidelines is going to be your best way of looking at what you understood above as what was most important in your business and what you understand about the landscape. So you've got to get some stuff out there. People understand it, because if you're having to counsel them and talk through this with them, they have to understand why the guidelines are there and why you're putting them out there. And then I'd say the third thing that I do right away to try to make sure that you're doing something scalable, but at the same time, you're not the no department, is I'd be finding ways to create sandboxes and green lights. And what do I mean by that? I mean, find places for your business to start innovating that have enough guardrails around them that if something went too far, or you didn't have the right guideline in place, or they found something that was concerning, whether or not that means bias, inaccuracy, you name it, they would be able to contain it, shut it off. It wouldn't hurt customers. There's a lot of different ways you can think about what that looks like when you build sandboxes and green lights, but you need to build that. And it doesn't matter what type of innovation you're dealing with. We dealt with this a lot at Google. You have to find a way to let the business innovate when you have gray space in regulation. Otherwise, some of the most impressive and life-changing, customer-changing innovations will never get there if you're constantly saying no before that. So the way I look at it is, it's number one, embed and understand what the business needs. Number two, get some education, training, and guidelines out there, even if they're imperfect. And then three, figure out how to find we'll call it close to no regret sandboxes and green lights, but give them some space to iterate while all of this develops. And I think those three things get you out of the gates pretty quickly.
Marianne and Courtney, but Marianne, how can we base this on prior times in our careers, in our company's businesses, where something in technology has rapidly come to us, come to the company? Can you give an example? I know that, I've done different things, with contracting and checking board minutes with AI and board resolutions with AI, but can you give some specific examples or stories about how we can figure out how to leverage frameworks maybe that we've already had, and yet protect the company and figure out, as Courtney said, where should we start concentrating? What is the lowest hanging fruit?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in going fast and not being the department of no, but being the department of how we do this. And I always believe in right-sizing endeavors. It's critical that you know your business, its opportunities, risks, profitability levers, and crown jewels. That's where you're going to make the biggest impacts. And know your law department. Where's your spend? What are your greatest needs? And who can be your swing players? Stretching and flexing where needed. I even designated a lawyer and a paralegal to be my software shoppers, my technology shoppers. So, you've got a tremendous basis with your crisis management team and your compliance teams, and they have much to offer in the AI arena. You can consider piggybacking or lifting salient features out of those programs so you can move fast on AI development. And here again, the officers and employees should be responsible on a regular basis. So you extend the compliance process and the risk framework and the audit programs, and then you add on the AI lifecycle controls from use cases approvals in post-deployment monitoring. And I know Courtney's got a lot of experience with that. So you see what's going on and what's happened. You extend the compliance documentation for AI reports and logs. And then you align with worldwide emerging regulations and standards, because this is all played out all over the world. So you've got the basis right there. Jump on it, utilize it, make big wins, and it'll be really a vanguard for your whole company. And they'll see very quickly that the general counsel is the enabler. They're the partner, and they're the confidant of the board and the C-suite. I think this is a great opportunity.
Courtney,
Not a problem.
do you have anything to add to that or any other examples?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. Marianne, great comments there. I think I was thinking about all these different webinars like this that we're having on AI, right? We're all trying to really educate ourselves and share information, because it's new and it's evolving. And that's exactly when you reach out to people and you listen to other people and you gain insights and you grow from it. But if you go back a number of years, a very similar wave was happening, and that was around the state privacy laws. So GDPR happened, and then the U.S. started to spread different privacy approaches across the U.S., and California was a pretty big high mark as well. And a lot of companies that were working nationwide, sometimes globally, were very concerned. How do we take this quilt patchwork of regulations and make sure that we're compliant? And there were a lot of concerns around it. And that was at the board level, that was at the executive management level. And all of us as lawyers were trying to learn from each other. And one of the things that I feel really strongly about, and the approach I took leading Allstate through that, was when these times happen, you have to step back and you have to look at the themes that come out of those laws and think to yourself, and look out to commentators and to others, what are the regulators likely to either currently or in the future be protecting against? And when they do that, what kinds of things that you think will come up? So an example from state privacy laws was, instead of trying to meet every single regulation that was spreading across the country, we divided it up and said, let's come up with a thematic approach. And when we did that, we kind of thought of it as almost like a house with pillars. And this was also an easier way to explain it to our board and explain it to our business partners, Audrey, so they didn't think we were saying no. In fact, we were saying yes, but let's build the house together, right? And things like the foundational pillar was, where's your personal information inventory and mapping? Where is personal information? Do you have it mapped? Okay, very relevant for AI. Do you know where you're going to use AI? Do you know how it's going to flow? Do you know what it's going to achieve? The things we talked about before. What are you going to do at the end of life for personal information and disposal? How are you going to think about when consumers want to see and access their data? What are you going to do if they say they do not want it sold? What are you going to do about your privacy statements? How you tell people what you do with their information? And then the last pillar was around breach notification. So we took those, and although there was a ton of complications within those pillars, we built work streams and we thought about where we were today and where we think the watermark's going to be, and what do we have to change about our business processes to be there, so that what we were doing was not just reacting, we were building a foundation of how to do the right thing that the regulators wanted us to do, because the regulators are out there because they're trying to protect something for customers and people. That's the best way to look at it. And that's true for AI. They want AI to do great things for customers, but they want it to be accurate. They don't want it to have bias, and they want to make sure we understand what it is doing, that there's not unintended consequences. So I think our job as orchestrators, right, is to step back, look at it from a really strategic way, and then build programs that make sense. I think the state privacy laws That's true with cyber too. I know now cyber is so well developed in most companies, but if you go back 10, 15 years, that wasn't the case. You had to think about it strategically and really build incredible programs. So we have a lot to build on, both as, overall companies and organizations, and then our function as legal that we can go back to. So I would say state privacy laws is probably, to me, the most analogous that I can get to for where we're going with AI.
Thank you. And I'm also wondering if it wouldn't be a good place to start for some law departments to figure out what's even being used already. Does everybody know? Like, are we banning, whatever, Chat GPT? Are we using some AI to pay our company's bills? I mean, I'll bet there are uses already happening that we don't even know about. In fact, I'm sure of that with my dealing with my clients. Let's go to the next slide, which is another.
May I add one thing, Audrey?
Please,
At this
please
time,
do.
there are 91,000 AI platforms out there. If you don't know what's in your company, that's a problem. Because if there is a problem and you don't have an AI policy and you don't have a data protection policy, the board's going to demand to know why. And as Audrey said, we've got to catch up now. We've got to be the one who lays the foundation. And when I first dealt with the internet of everything for my companies, believe me, taking the time to build that solid foundation, we built an agreement called the partner agreement. And I actually had to explain to our 600-person sales force how we get customers to sign that. If you build a solid foundation, it served the company well for 25, 30 years. That's why take the time, do it right.
Good, good points. And, there are so many resources for you, colleagues, organizations, bar organizations, the ACC, outside counsel. I often recommend to my corporate clients, ask your outside counsel. They've probably given this advice to somebody else already, and see how they can quickly educate you and maybe provide some guidance. Let's go to the next slide, please. And let's talk here about investment. Investment in AI. And is AI going to drive profit, do you think? I mean, I think in some ways it will cut costs, which means it will drive profit if used properly. And in fact, for some of my clients, we actually counted things like how many emails a lawyer got on the same kind of deal, right? A day, and how much time that took, if it's 5 minutes per email, so on and so forth. Whereas if it was all organized into one kind of question through AI, we would have saved hours. Same with contracts, same with board materials. Same with some advice, I think. What do you think, Courtney? Is this going to keep exploding? And how are we going to anticipate what to do? And is it in fact going to help, or is it going to be a little harmful to some companies?
I think it's going to help. I'm really positive on AI. I think we've got a lot of problems to solve for customers in most of our companies, and AI is going to help us do it. I'm cautious that we need to lean into ethics and think about how ethics map to digital environments, which most companies have started to develop over a number of years before this, but we have to accelerate that and make sure that we're building in protection for things like bias that we talked about and inaccuracy that could lead to, to bad outcomes. So I think we have to be cautious, but I think there's really no way to go backwards now. There's too much goodness here from it, particularly from a business perspective. And what I think will be interesting for legal AI technology, so now pivoting a little bit away from what, we counsel the business from, but what we will use it as lawyers, I think, we saw e-discovery and all of those type of tools get really, really good over time. Now we're starting to use AI for a lot of different research, and it's very good for contracting and some of the nuts and bolts. But what I'm working on and what I've seen to be very interesting now is how will AI provide us as lawyers with context faster. And I think of context as currency, because when you're trying to give someone good legal advice, especially we're talking about in-house now, right? So we can't write a brief and send it to you via email and talk to you in a week. We have to do it in the moment when a business partner is trying to get a competitive advantage or a win. And that context we can get from AI as a baseline that fast is going to be really helpful. And I think about it in the context of negotiating deals too. There are so many times where you know directionally this is good for your business or not good for your business. But do you have a finer point on exactly how much money something will drive based on how you're negotiating it at that moment? Not usually to the dollar. And now with AI, we can do that. I'm working on a project that relates to that, where you really look at the whole value chain and you figure out how your different negotiations for different terms, including legal terms, things like IP indemnities, you name it, where we couldn't put a number to it. You can now because of the data you can extract from a company. And that is going to empower us. It's going to empower the procurement people, the sales people, our M&A business development people, us as lawyers. Because honestly, I always say this, context is currency. You can make better decisions. You can help people make better decisions when you know more. So that's where I feel like this next kind of, when I think about it, really getting even more interesting than using it for, specific contracting tools or research. It's going to be the commercial value that you can drive from it. So I find that very exciting.
Interesting. Mary Ann, any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. You can't stop progress. That's the nature of technology. There's no going back. All you can do is, unfortunately, default, and that has very bad consequences. I like to say denial is not a solution. It's a river in Africa. So get with it. Unfortunately, not enough companies have the policies around artificial intelligence. Not enough companies have the foundations around this. And as I said before, this isn't just applicable to the legal departments. This is for your whole company. So you've got to be part of what makes your company more valuable. And there's no bigger lever than this, than really exploring the strategy of your company, talking freely in your C-suites about how artificial intelligence impacts your business. And you can be a superstar in this arena because there is fear around this. On Valentine's Day, Peggy Noonan wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and she got a lot of attention. And I was pointed to this from a director that I know. The headline was "Brace Yourself for the AI Tsunami." And if you haven't read it, it's Valentine's Day, go for it. She talks about the growing anxieties and concludes with, in the end, you wonder, of the creators, are they in control or is there creation? That's new. That didn't happen with the internet or the telephone. So you have to ask yourself, are you going to have a phobia or a foreboding about this? You want to be on top of this. You want to use the information. You want to use the technology. You want to provide that platform to your company so that they can be more profitable and more relevant to the world.
Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, another poll, friends. Two polls, actually. The first one, has your AI platforms been approved or authorized consistently? I kind of guess we're going to say I don't think anybody's done it consistently, maybe unless you work for NASA or something, but let's see. Have your AI platforms been approved or authorized consistently? I guess the next thought and the next question is, does your organization have AI and privacy policies in place? Aha. Oh, yes, all are approved. I'm pretty impressed by that. Some, no formal. I'm impressed by how they're all approved. I don't want to challenge anybody here, but I'm wondering if we really know that they're all approved. I'm sorry to be so skeptical, but I guess that's what makes us lawyers. And what's the next question? Does your organization have AI policies and privacy policies established?
When we're waiting for this, I'll mention something, Audrey, to your point, because I think your caution is well placed when you saw that. Um, when I was working with sort of maturing privacy, at one point we were trying to figure out where personal information was and how it was mapped, and a really insightful comment someone made was, you can have the very best privacy program, but if it's aimed over here and all your personal information is in a different part of the company, then it's not a good privacy program because it wasn't aimed to really hit where personal information is everywhere, right? And so what I would caution is, even if you think that you have it all, you may not, because this is moving so fast. And so you need to be thinking about, to your point, Audrey, where else is it being used? Embed yourself as much as possible with the technologists and business people to make sure you truly know where it is used, because you could be developing great policies and procedures, great business processes. You could be bringing in monitoring and controls, all kinds of helpful tools even to make that happen. But if you're missing where it's being used, then you're not hitting the bullseye, right? You're really aiming it the wrong way. So I think your caution is well placed. And when we were dealing with the dawn of really the spreading privacy laws, we had to think about that. We really had
Yeah,
to dig. We had to dig.
right. And my concern, and somebody from the audience actually just wrote in a question about this. My concern is that we have approval processes, but that doesn't mean everybody's following them. How can you realistically be sure nobody's using ChatGPT to draft a letter or, some marketing materials? How can you really be sure about that? And even if you have a policy against using it, um, the only way you could possibly know, I guess, would be for your tech department to constantly monitor. And is that even worth?
Well, those controls exist. They do because of cybersecurity. Again, this is where you leverage what you have, right?
Yeah, but is
Um,
the question would be, is it worth it? Do I really care if somebody uses ChatGPT to do the first draft of a memo? I don't know. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But this is where it gets pretty kind of specific and a little bit, not Wild West, but we do have to be careful. Can I see the poll results on question 3? Oh, that's great. Organizations have AI and privacy policies established. That's super. That's really great. Um,
Audrey, I'd like to add something here because I think
mhm.
we're sort of preaching to the choir with our audience here, because I've had a recent study saying that only 38% of companies have a usage policy and only 32% have data protection policies. So I think that, we've got a great audience and that we're speaking to, but the rest of corporate America may not, and businesses may not be in the same position. So, you do care what people are looking at. And that's why I suggest drilling in like compliance, right to the employees, saying this is your responsibility to tell us what you are doing. Because the problem is, what if somebody's going in there and asking legal questions? I know that there's been a recent case, and Courtney can address it in detail, but if you get one thing in this webinar, it is that you are the lawyer for the company. Only you have a privilege. And if someone enters a question, no matter how well intended, that communication is not privileged. And I'll give you a real life example from my world. When I was setting up the rules for research for the customers of a big publishing company, legal publishing company, I said, we do not want to become a storeroom and testifying against our customers, because if I were the government, if I were the IRS, I would want to know what that company looked at the day they made a decision. So, warning, make sure your clients know why they can't be seeking legal advice in artificial intelligence, and why you are their lawyer and what powers you have that that the technology does not. Believe me, I always like to say to my clients, internal clients, how would you like to have to be the one I have to finger to say why the wheels went off the track in a matter that's serious because you were reckless, you didn't follow the rules. So think about that.
Right. One of the questions from the audience here is actually uh, kind of really relevant. How can you even check? There are tools to check it, but do we, at some point, isn't something like Grammarly, AI? And maybe we want them to use Grammarly. So again, this is kind of doing a survey of what's out there, doing a risk analysis on what you actually care about very much. And there was another question from the audience, and well, what do we do about it? And, for that, in my experience, the answer is you have training, you have policies for everybody, but you also have training for everybody. And you especially train the managers. Most companies have, training requirements for such things as, how you treat people in the workplace, privacy. So you add a training module on the proper use and the improper use of AI, and then you have to take that seriously and remind people. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So, okay, here are some frameworks now that we recommend for either leveraging what you may already have or building enterprise-wide frameworks, okay? And this is kind of going back to the question of who owns it? How much do you already have? And you can see how there are different specialties here. There's technology specialties. There's compliance with laws. That's a legal specialty. How do we combine these and orchestrate solutions? Let's start with you, Courtney. You've emphasized leveraging existing foundations, as do I recommend that, and I think Marianne does too. We said that GCs and law departments should start maybe by assessing what their companies already have, but that's a little vague. Can you give us some more examples on what bases do we use? How do we draft, if you will, or come up with enterprise risk management framework?
Yep. I think, and we can go up maybe a slide and just talk about the governance components because I think that will help a little bit too as you start to then pull it into the AI framework. But
Okay.
yeah, I think that might help. But at the end of the day, what we wanted to emphasize here too was, to your point, there are standards like NIST. There's others where you can go and look at those. Sometimes when you go pull them, they feel a bit overwhelming, right? But if you look at other places where you've pulled them in your company, I gave the example of state privacy laws. Depending on if you're in financial services, you would have a risk organization that has a very strong ERM framework. But at the end of the day, I would go back to themes. And the reason why I like this slide is it kind of shows you what themes all these different frameworks have. Because to your point, Audrey, even that gets overwhelming. If you're fortunate enough to have a bunch of these frameworks to leverage, you then sort of get overwhelmed with, wait a minute, I can't just layer on another thing for our business, right? Because then you go back to, you start to be looked at as a department that they're going to avoid instead of lean into with. So that's where I think it's really important for you to take a step back and say, okay, we have a control framework. We have a lot of different things that inform that and drive that. Some is cyber, some might be your SOX control, some might be your SEC disclosure rules, some might be vendor obligations or customer obligations. Some now may be from AI. And I would then go and try to bucket it. And for me, these are the typical buckets that I think about. about activities and ways you should think about organizing it. So, and we've talked about some of these at a really high level. That's, you govern, you map, you measure, and you manage. And then this is now another layer down, thinking about how you actually implement this. But if you read most of these you could put in the place of AI a different area. So you could write cyber instead, and it's close, right? When we think about privacy laws, we're supposed to go out and we're supposed to look at an assessment of what the privacy risk is, right? And those are in existing laws. If you want to think about like a Venn diagram, probably 80% of those very similar to what you would ask for AI. If you think about your diligence practices, you go to buy a company, right? You're asking questions like, are there activities at the company you're purchasing that expand across borders globally? Well, that question leads you to a bunch of different ways to think about risk. One would be there's different privacy risks and there's different AI risks if you're talking about the global environment. But there's also business aspects of that. So I think a lot of what you learn, even with M&A transactions and how we think about diligence and integration, is relevant to how you think about organizing your approach to understanding AI activity and then governing it. So, but I find this framework to be helpful.
Thank you. Marianne, which of these pillars do you want to talk about in the remaining limited time that we have? Because we also have some interesting audience questions to address. But I know, Marianne, your concentration often is at the board level. What are the boards looking for nowadays?
Boards are looking for very specific things. They want you to get on with it. Boards are asking, how do we use it? Why don't we use it? What are the benefits and the costs of using it? What are the risks of using it? Who's accountable to the board and the shareholders? Who's auditing these functions? That's what they're worried about, right? They want their companies to be very successful. They want them to take advantage of good technology, but they also want to be sure that you've built the solid foundation that I've talked about. It's really important. They are all asking these questions and they are on fire with this. Your team, and I always say this to my fellow members of the C-suite, we rise and fall together. And, you as the GC, you're the secretary of the company generally. You invite the people to the board, to the dinner, to the meetings. You shepherd the other officers in and out. You're the person with their ear to everything. So it's natural that you be the orchestrator, that you be the coordinator, and that you be a quarterback in this process. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for people who say, we've got this. Don't worry. We're doing this correctly. And we've got, there is always going to be slip ups in everything. But as long as they know that you care, that you've got the foundation, you've done the best you can, and that you are monitoring it and auditing it, they're going to feel good.
Yeah, Marianne, I would say that's true. And Audrey, I'd point to that end, incident response and remediation. Look, boards are smart enough to know that this is a new space, that applying it to different business models has huge return opportunities, but there are downsides. So what they're going to want to know is not just that you put things in place, because they know you're going to have to continue to evolve those. They're going to have to be agile. But what they're going to want to see, and what's going to give you some comfort, is it's not about if, it is when something will go wrong. And that is the kind of the mindset change that we had to have in cyber over time. Was it didn't matter how good your program was, you were going to have some incidents. So how were you able to respond to them? What kind of resilience could you show? And when you could show it, that was what really had credibility and made people realize that you could keep moving forward, right? That's the same with something like AI where you're innovating. They need to know what's going to happen when something that you didn't intend happens, whether or not that's a bias outcome, whether or not that's inaccuracy, whether or not that's disclosure of something. You mentioned that where, somebody did put something in wrong, and then it was made public. What is the way that you as an organization are going to come back from that? And how are you going to limit and mitigate what happens when that happens? And then how are you going to go and make it better, right? Root cause it, and then create a feedback loop that you're doing better and better. I
Yeah.
think you're starting to see boards move to that side, and actually hearing what the audience said about all the work they've done on the left side tells me we're starting to move, which is pretty fast, actually. If you think about how long it took to get there for cyber, that's happening faster maybe then with AI, which makes sense. Tech is fast, but they're going to want to see that right side response and how sophisticated it is. And, in cyber, and this is true of AI, and you said this earlier, you may need to have third parties helping you. Right? This was very common where you had to go out and make sure you have really sophisticated parties that are helping other parties respond to incidents. So they have benchmarking to work with.
Right. And we always took the position, I always took the position at Ann that at least if you do the training, mandatory, and you keep track of who's doing it and so forth, you have one kind of blanket defense in your defense column. That doesn't cover everything, but at least if you do the training, you're helping your company with some kind of backup defense. One of the
And
questions,
may I add one thing, Audrey, here?
sure.
It's critical that this be part of your culture. And that gives the board tremendous confidence. I remember walking into an audit committee of the board meeting, and somebody had laid a problem and sent letters to each member of the audit committee. And the chair of the committee handed me the paper. I read it. I said, "Oh, I know about this. It's not valid." He just immediately didn't ask why, didn't ask what. He just took all the letters and said, "Give them to Mary Ann." That's what you want to build. You want to build the confidence that you're on top of things. And at your next leadership meeting, I suggest you go in there and orchestrate for artificial intelligence for the company, not just the C-suite. You should have done it with the C-suite already. But then at a leadership meeting with all of the company's key employees, you talk about this and you talk about how we move forward. It will be very helpful to everyone and will inure to your leadership. Trust me.
That's really great advice. One of the questions from the audience was to give specific examples of how law departments successfully use AI. I will give one or two, and then we can move on to the last question. I've been able to use AI. My clients have been able to use AI in literally routing legal requests to the right person in the law department, rather than sending an email to, a bucket of questions from the business that somebody has to go through, or asking questions or sending contracts or review materials to the lawyer that they've always used because they like that person. The AI will understand the content of the request and route it to the right person. Think how much time that saves. I've been able to use AI with contract execution. If the contract is sitting in one person's inbox, how am I supposed to know that they're busy, they're sick, whatever, they didn't get to it, it got buried. But AI can track it and tell you where it is. AI can share the status of pretty much anything. You can share with your outside counsel real time. You can share with your tech department how many computers are being scraped in response to a subpoena. You can use it so successfully to make things more efficient and save time. Mary Ann, Courtney, you want to give one or two examples of what a legal department can do?
I'll just give you, because I used AI to ask the question, you'll enjoy this. How many AI tools are there for legal work? The answer came back. Hundreds of AI legal tools exist among different categories, and there are many categories. Audrey mentioned them. Courtney will mention more. That's why I'm saying it's really important to have someone in your law department be designated as the shopper, the person who goes out and kicks the tires, who decides what's best for you to invest in. And I found that provided tremendous value to me in my law departments. At the aerospace company that I was the GC of, they did everything the right way, and they were never afraid to say, what could we have done better? So always be asking yourself that question.
Courtney, anything?
So, yeah, I mean, I would say we are at a point where there is tons of PE investment in legal technology. So there is a proliferation of technology out there. It is useful, and I definitely think you want people who both understand the technology, but then bringing the lawyers shopping for it, to Mary Ann's point, and being intentional about it. But what I would say is, you really need to think about what problem you're solving. And this happens every time there's a huge onslaught of different opportunity and technology. I think we get so into adopting it and implementing it that we forget that we're not using it for its own sake. We are using it to solve a problem. So when we think about ourselves as lawyers, what are some of the problems we always hear about us? And be honest with yourself, right? Because perception is reality. What do you hear in-house? You hear we're too costly. You hear we're too slow. And we're not where we need to be at the moment they need to have a question answered. Because guess what? We don't get to have a bunch of people because we're trying to keep costs down. So those are the type of problems that I think AI are really going to be interesting. We'll talk, I talked already about the context stuff. I think it will help for business counseling. But where is it going to be for us where we couldn't be from a cost perspective? And so one area I would say that's going to get really interesting and is continuing to evolve is when you think about all the governance that needs to go into what we've talked about today. And this is particular for either complex AI rollouts or in any kind of larger company. The scale is going to get very difficult quickly to be able to govern it. And if you think you're going to govern it only with humans, you're wrong. You're going to be governing AI. You're going to govern agentic agents with governance agents. And I want you to wrap your brain around that and understand that you will be governing AI with AI. And if we think it's different, then we literally will not be able to get this done. So what's interesting to me is thinking about how you would have, let's say you're going to have a framework where there's agents talking to each other. You would actually have built in ways to have legal principles in those. It's almost like feeding in playbooks, but it'll be more sophisticated so that they know, right now, this is going into a global business model. When you do global work, here's 4 more things that need to be answered, right? Because you as a lawyer can't be everywhere. So what I would say is we're going to be using it everywhere. We're going to have to get comfortable with it, and we're going to have to get creative with it.
Great.
That's
John, I
amazing.
see
You know, if you see my face, we're coming to a close. This hour went by like a snap of a finger. Everyone's definitely so fortunate to hear from you, Fortune 500 General Counsel, who've been there, done it, and seen it all. So really amazing. One thing I will just comment from the executive search side: if you're going into an interview and you can't speak intelligently about what you know about AI, you probably aren't going to get the job. So very, very important that you don't rely on just someone on your team to do the research and let you know what's out there. You need to be able to speak the language just as well as Courtney does, and obviously as well as Audrey and Mary Ann. So really, really important stuff. But you guys were terrific. Made 1 hour of my day go by so quickly. I can't even believe it. I guess I'll leave it in your court. Do you have any last words to say? I think you just sized it up really well, Courtney.
If you had one piece of advice in one sentence about AI, what would you tell our audience, Courtney? One sentence, one piece of AI advice.
This is our moment. This is why we are lawyers.
I love it. Mary Ann?
My advice is, because I've worked with a lot of aggressive business people, is if you are looking to AI to give you legal advice, you are playing with dynamite.
Oh, yeah.
My piece of advice.
Mary Ann, I love when you say if you take one thing away from this website, that was just amazing piece of advice.
That was great. And
So,
mine is don't be afraid. We've been using AI in ways that we didn't even think were AI for a long, long time. And there's plenty of people out there to help you, including us, and answer questions, and just start at the low-hanging fruit, which is kind of the way I like to start if possible. Thank
that
you.
was really great. So we hope we see everyone in the audience again at future webinars. And I always have to put out the reminder, if anyone knows anyone looking for an opportunity, looking to make a strategic hire, or looking for a coach, I love these guys are actually doing a webinar on April 1st, and they say only a fool wouldn't have a coach. So fitting for April's Fool's Day coaching seminar. But yeah, please keep us in mind. We really appreciate it. And we look forward. If anyone has ideas for future webinars or anyone wants to participate as a guest on one of ours, Courtney, thank you again. Really, really valuable. You make such a dynamite impression. You should be the benchmark for General Counsel and the way you interact with the team here. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.